Tonight, our very own Dave, if you don't know Dave, he's part of we've granted call ourselves a board, but the group of guys who try and put these sessions together for you every week. Dave is one of our very own, and Dave and I have been trying to put together a series of irregular sessions about operations. So if you might recall, Dave did an introduction a few months ago about operations in general. I did a session on easy operations using track warrants. And following that theme tonight, Dave is going to do a session on easy operations using timetable and train order, timetable and train orders. And if it's not an oxymoron, we're going to try and make that easy, or a contradiction in terms even, try and make that easy by doing it perhaps without using a clock. So with that, I'll hand it over to our very own Dave. Take it away, Dave.
So this is going to be a simple TT and TO for narrow gauge. And as Robin said, this is a third in the series on operations that we thought we would try and do. And I'm going to segue here into a kind of a quick recap of TT and TO history. So it's been around for an awful long time. I mean, this was got started in the early to mid 1800s. It was timetable operation back then. And there were meeting places that were prescribed in the timetable. When a train arrived, it waited until its counterpart arrived. And then after they had met, then they could move on. If a train broke down or was really late, this basically tied up the whole railroad. In 1851, the superintendent on a railroad, he basically used telegraph. Railroad had installed telegraph in order to communicate information about customers and shippers and carloads on that. And he decided he was going to use the telegraph to telegraph up the railroad to the next station and say, is this train there yet? And if not, hold it because I'm going to advance to your station, even though we're supposed to meet here. So that occurred. In 1872, railroads got together and they had the first timetable convention. Said, we need to standardize some of this stuff. In 1884, they chartered a group to draft a standard code. In 1889, they adopted the first standard code for uniform train op rules for the movement of trains by telegraphic orders. And it turns out the standard code continued to develop under the American Railway Association starting in 1891 and under the American Association of Railroads in 1934. And this continued. 1980s, we had reliable radios, lots of new union agreements, the adoption of direct train control, track warrant control, and traditional train orders on most railroads. Strangely enough, is because of these advances in technology, there really hasn't been any use of TT and TO on a Class 1 railroad now for about 40 years. So what we're doing is we're trying to do a little bit of modeling of the history that was all part of narrow gauge and part of standard gauge back then. Okay, so we're going to try this without a clock. So no fast clock, no timetable, but we can run all trains as extras. There's lots of forms of train orders, but I think in narrow gauge you can be successful really with only two of them. One of them is an order that basically authorizes an extra train, known as Form G, and the other is for fixing meeting points for opposing trains, and that's a Form A order. So if we take a look at the left here, I've written up a draft order for train order number 1, dated October 8th, 2024, to the conductor and engineer of engine 207 at Chama. And it says, engine 207, run extra, Chama to Durlin. And down at the bottom, it's signed by the chief dispatcher, the time it was made complete, and who the operator was at the depot that copied the order. Similarly, I'm dictating a train order number 2, and it's dated same date, and it's to the conductor and engineer of 207 East at Corumba. So the train we just authorized is going to pick this order up further down the line. It's also going to conductor and engineer of extra 278 West at Durlin. And this order says extra 278 West, take the siding at Fritz Park and meet extra 207 east. And again, the same formality stuff at the bottom. You can see in the picture on the left, 207 is sitting there. He's got his white class lamps on, indicating he's running an extra. So this says they've been in, they've talked to the operator, they've got their orders and the clearance card, and they're ready to go. Whereas 278 up there, he's sitting there by the depot and he's not, doesn't have his class lamps on and he's not going anywhere. So let's take a look at some other things that we're going to need here. One, do I need a timetable if I don't have any scheduled trains? My answer is, yes, unless your railroad is two endpoints and there isn't anything in between. And why do you need it? Well, it's a great way to keep train crews and the dispatcher on the same page about where things are supposed to happen. And the prototype, when you look at this, in later years when they were running all extras and things of this sort, is, yeah, their timetable, they still issued it, the employees still carried it, and there wasn't any time on it. But it did list all of the stations over a given division or subdivision in order and what the facilities were there. Okay, well, what if I do have a timetable? Well, it may look something like this. And in this case, this is off of my railroad here. And if you remember that extra 207 east on train order number 1, okay, that crew would then use this information to stay out of the way of trains on schedule, because an extra train is the lowest form of life on a railroad. Okay, do I need a computer to make a timetable? And the answer is no. A quad rule graph paper, a ruler and a pencil and a copy machine will do just fine. I mean, this doesn't have to be a lot of work or big bucks. So let's go back and see where we are here. If you remember, we've got extra 207 west on train order number 2, and he's sitting at Durlin, but he can't go anywhere because he does not have a run extra order. So we're going to write train order number 3. Train order number 3 is dated the same date, and it's to the conductor and engineer of engine 207 at Durlin. And it says engine 207 run extra Durlin to Chama. And it's got the usual headers and everything at the bottom. And why did we do this? Well, you always set your protection between opposing extras before allowing one of them to run. And this had to do with, in the old days, as you had wire failures, the telegraph didn't always work. What you did not want to do was have two stations release two extras headed into each other unless you knew they were protected against each other first. If the wire fell down after you had set up your protection and you had the other train arrive, wait, okay, he's going to wait, but there's no harm and there's no collision. And you have a chance to get things straightened out. So in the picture on the right, you can see the conductors come back from the trainman's lobby in the depot there. And the engineer's got the class lamps turned on. And so we're basically ready to head out of town. Well, is that all there is to it? Not quite. So the station telegrapher and the dispatcher need to agree on the train orders and other particulars a train is to receive. In our case today here, that's not so important because we really aren't going to be working with agent operators at stations. But the crew needs to know that they have received all the information. Enter the clearance card. So what you see here is on the left is one that was generated, that I generated from the prototype using a computer. And on the right is one you can buy from Micromark. It's a generic clearance Form A. It's on NCR form and it works just great. Or you can make your own with, again, paper, ruler, pencil, and a copy machine, and scissors or a paper cutter. So let's take a look at the Micromark NCR forms. And the reason we're doing that is because I think they're great. We used to cut up carbon paper. We had train orders and clearances printed on a letterpress. And carbon paper in multiple copies, it's just really ugly to work with. So we decided to suspend being too prototypical and go for ease of operation here. In this case, I've replicated train order number 1 on the NCR Form 19. You can see that over there. That's what it looks like in my chicken scratch handwriting. And on the right, you can see the clearance card that, again, in my handwriting, I filled out in order to be able to deliver that order to engine 207 in Chama. Said, as I'm both dispatcher and the station operators on my railroad and the others I dispatch, and I love these micromark forms. The carbonless feature allows you to make as many copies as needed, plus an extra that's pasted into a spiral-bound notebook to keep track of what was issued. So this is a real help for keeping things straight. Okay, taking a look at this, there's one more thing we need to talk about, and that's the dispatcher's train sheet. This sheet is how dispatchers keep track of who is where based on reports from the train order offices. So in this case, I have, basically used pencil, ruler, and a quadrilled paper, and I've basically come up with a dispatcher sheet based on the run that we're going to make here. This stuff at the top is all interesting, and it's on most prototype sheets, but if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. And the same thing with all the stuff at the bottom here. As you get into things, you find out keeping these kinds of records turns out to be fun. What's important on this is down the center, this is the same station order or name place order that we saw earlier in this clinic. Now, the three items with the arrows on it are important because these are the only stations at which an operator is on duty. That's at Chama, that's at Corumba, and that's at Durlin. There's places in between where things can happen on the railroad, but nobody's on duty there. The dispatcher can't communicate with anybody, and that's it. But you can have things happen at those locations. So let's get some things on a train sheet here. So the first thing we do is we hear that extra 207 has left Chama. So we go down here and we take our pen and we basically draw a line from Chama up to Corumba. Why up to Corumba? Well, that's the next place on the line where we expect to hear a report about what this train is doing, whether he's arrived or not. So we've got that done. Now we can take a look and get that extra 278 west on the sheet. Okay, so we hear that he's left Durlin, and we can draw a line down to the next station where something is going to happen. Remember, train order number 2 said he has a meet at Fritz Park. And so we draw the line from Durlin down to Fritz Park here, headed westbound. Okay, so far so good. Now, at Corumba, extra 207 has a red order board. It's arrived. He stops and he picks up that train order number 3. If you recall, train order number 3 says 207 has got to meet 278 at Fritz Park. So this is what we have here in the photo. You can see 207 there by the depot. You can see the train orders signals are set. What you can't see very well because you're looking at the backside of a white paddle is the fact that the board is set against him, meaning he's got to stop and he's got to pick up orders, which is what he has done in this case. Okay, let's take a look at what the dispatcher hopes is going to be happening at Fritz Park. On the left, you can see extra 207 west waiting in the siding at Fritz Park for extra 207 east. And the right photo is we've got extra 207 on the main meeting extra 207 west in the siding at Fritz Park. So if what's happening up there out of the dispatcher's sight and knowledge that it actually is happening, things are going well. So we can take a look at this. What do we have? Well, Corumba reports that extra 278 west has arrived, and so we can extend the line from Fritz Park down into Corumba. The good news about this is it says the meet at Fritz Park has occurred. If it hadn't occurred as planned, the conductor or the survivor of the wreck would have tried to cut into the telephone line or found a phone booth and called up the dispatcher and said, send wreck train and the doctor. We've got a problem here. So that didn't happen. So that's good news. So this is what our dispatcher sheet looks like right now. Okay, then we can hear from that extra 278 west has departed Corumba. So we extend the line to Chama, and we can assume 207 has also left Fritz Park. So we can extend that line down to Durlin, or up to Durlin rather. So we've done that. And this is what our sheet looks like here. So at this point, the dispatcher is just waiting to hear from the train order offices at the two ends of the line that these trains have safely arrived. So when that happens, we hear from Durlin that extra 207 East has arrived. All right. So we can extend the line up into Durlin and mark that train column to show that the train is no longer active. So it says complete, and we've got a slash drawn through it that says the dispatcher no longer needs to worry about him. He's home safe. And then we hear from Chama that extra 2078 West has arrived in Chama, so we can extend that line down into Chama and mark that train as being no longer active as well. So there we've run two extras opposing to each other over the train without using a fast clock or a timetable. It's actually pretty simple and it's kind of fun to do. So let me move to the next slide here, which is what everybody always wants to know. What if someone louses up? I'm going to say that's going to happen. We louse up on our sections all the time. You can count on it. The good news is, unlike on the prototype, we don't get killed or injured with our models. So we've got a real saving grace here. So what do? Well, everybody has a good laugh, figure out what went wrong, discuss discuss it, and you've got a learning experience. The photo in the background is actually a photo of a lap order that was accidentally issued that had two trains meeting on the straight track just out of Antonito, unbeknownst to each other, that they both had the right of way opposing each other at that time. The good news was the line of sight is really good there, so they were able to avoid a problem. And I suspect the dispatcher got a chewing out by the chief dispatcher for that bit of inattention. So the other question kind of comes up, so can time fit into this? And the answer, I think, to that is, yeah, you can use regular clock time, fast clock time. You can record it in the tree in the sheet. And in fact, using this kind of an artifice to collect data on how your railroad runs is really good before you try and design a timetable. So in this case, if we take a look at what I've done here, we've got that same timetable. And one of the things you may have noticed that for each named place on the railroad, the row is divided in half into an upper and lower half. And the reason for that is that's so the dispatcher has got a place to record an arrival time and a departure time. So if you take a look at the bottom on Shama, we don't have an arrival time there because we're only leaving. So in the upper part of that, upper half of that Shama entry there is we've got a time that the train left town. Into Corumba, we've got both an arrival time and a departure time. And again, I just kind of made these up based on what actually happens on my railroad if we're using a clock rather than a fast clock. And the same thing we've got there. When the train arrives at Durlin and you look at it and you say, okay, he got in at 10:51 a.m., you record that in there. And now you've got some data and you can do this. In our case, to set up schedules and things of this sort, we operated for almost a year with a dispatcher just recording times off of a real clock that the crews called out to the dispatcher as they arrived and departed the various stations where an operator was to be on duty. So well, with that, we can wrap this up here, and I'm going to pose the question, can this work with a sequence schedule, i.e. running a sequence schedule without a clock? And I think that's actually a good topic for a future clinic. So at this point, it would be great if we could have questions, comments, and discussions. The thing is how this is being recorded without a live audience, we aren't going to be able to do that. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have learned something and are looking forward to the next clinic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. And I think, yeah, what we'd love to see on the groups.io on the NNG website, give us our feedback about if you'd like us to continue doing these sessions on operations. When we did this presentation live, the overwhelming feedback there was, yes, we'd like to carry on with that. So what we'd like to see, I'm not sure. I think looking at an operating system like using car cars or waybills, how we actually run our railroad, that is probably the next topic we might approach. But if you have any other ideas, please absolutely put them on the chat on the groups.io page, and we'll take that very seriously when we plan the next one sequence. Probably sometime next spring. We do these every 2 or 3 months in this sequence, or 3 or 4 months in this sequence.